Hereby I open this academic ceremony in which Jules Stouten will defend the academic thesis Water-borne Poly acrylates obtained from functional and renewable monomers. May I invite you to present a summary of your study and the conclusions of your thesis.
No, okay. Dear Pro-Rector, dear members of the Corona, dear audience, thank you all for coming. I will present my PhD thesis titled Water-borne Poly acrylates obtained from functional and renewable monomers. So I will start with explaining what is a waterborne acrylic latex. Simply said, it's a synthetic acrylic plastic which is dispersed in water into very small nano-sized particles. The water in this case acts as a carrier, and it allows the latex to be transported, formulated, and applied. The waterborne acrylic latex, the plastic, its main functionality is to act as a binder in coatings. So it gives its structural integrity, and a lot of the properties of the coating are determined by the binder. So I've mentioned that the water in this case is used as a carrier, and this serves some significant benefits over the one alternative, which is the solvent-based system. And in the solvent-based system, the polymers are molecularly dissolved, which really facilitates film forming. But of course, there is also some really obvious downsides related to the use of solvents, mainly related to health and environmental issues. But also water is, of course, a very abundant and cheap and safe material to use. So we find acrylic latexes in products that we use every day in our lives, mainly in films and coatings, for example, anti-corrosion coatings, which is a huge, a very large impact in our economy, in water and oil barriers, for example, in food packaging applications, and we find them also in paints. Another application that we find them is in pressure-sensitive adhesives, such as tapes. Now, how these acrylic latexes are prepared? They are prepared from acrylic monomers, which are then polymerized. And those monomers are not arbitrarily chosen. They fulfill a specific role in the system. So, for example, we have hard monomers, such as styrene and metal methacrylate, that increase the glass transition temperature and increase the hardness of the polymer. There is soft monomers that do the opposite. And there is functional monomers, such as, for example, acrylic acid, that add a certain functionality to the system. At the moment, these monomers are mostly derived from fossil resources. However, there has been, in the past time, a growing academic and industrial interest in the research towards renewable alternatives. And this is what is also investigated in this thesis. So several examples of this are, we can find those monomers in terpenes or natural oils or sugars. And these structures are also investigated in this thesis. So I've mentioned the obvious benefit of using a waterborne system, but it also brings some additional challenges, and this is mainly related to the film formation. The film formation of a waterborne acrylic latex or coating is driven mainly by the evaporation of water, and the process that describes this is coalescence. And an important part of the coalescence is the step where diffusion takes place. And in here, the polymer chains between the particles really diffuse and mix, and a homogeneous film is obtained. Now, in order for this to happen, the particles needs to be relatively soft, so that the polymer chains are dynamic. But that also means that the resulting film is soft, which is not useful for most applications. So one of the ways to overcome this is to add a supplementary cross-linking step. In here, the film, the homogeneous film is cross-linked, for example, by the addition of a cross-linker or external stimuli such as UV light. Especially UV light, it gives the user or the scientist even more control for the extent and the moment when he wants to cross-link this film. So this UV cross-linking, but also cross-linking in general, doesn't occur with any latex that you use. You need to build in a certain specific functionality inside. And this is what we propose in this thesis, the use of two novel and functional and renewable acrylic monomers, abbreviated with 4-CPA and MEV. And the goal is to develop the water-borne polymerization and obtain stable latexes. We also investigate the film forming and the cross-linking and see how the properties change as the result of the cross-linking. And we want to get an idea of the final film properties and what type of applications they could be useful for. So the method that was used for the synthesis of these latexes is a type of polymerization-induced self-assembly, abbreviated by PISA. And the chemistry proceeds via a raft-mediated radical polymerization. So in practice and on a molecular scale, how is this performed? First, a macro raft agent stabilizer is synthesized, which is water-soluble. And this is added together with the water, the hydrophobic monomers, and a radical initiator in the reactor. And the polymerization is started. And this macro raft agent stabilizer has this unique ability to be able to be chain extended with the hydrophobic monomers. And when this hydrophobic second block, the second chain, reaches a certain critical length, the polymer gets a sort of an A-B type of character. One side likes to be in water, the other side not, so the chains will spontaneously self-assemble like a soap as into a latex particle. And the polymerization will continue from there. So the use of raft over conventional free radical polymerization has several advantages. First of all, premature cross-linking is limited, which is a potential issue with the functional monomers. There is some control over the molecular weight. And the hydrophilic stabilizer, so this macro raft agent, is covalently attached. So in a conventional emulsion polymerization, typically free surfactants are used, which could later on migrate or leach outside of the coating. So then I will discuss the first monomer, which is 4-CPA and its chemistry. It is obtained from furfuryl alcohol, which is a bio-based molecule, via a Piancatelli rearrangement into 4-hydroxycyclopentanone. And this is a very interesting small molecule with a high functional group density. And we use the hydroxyl group for the esterification with acrylic acid to obtain 4-CPA. 4-CPA has two main distinctive functionalities, the acrylate group and the cyclopentanone group. And we have in this work established the selective polymerization of the acrylate group, yielding polymers with pendant cyclopentanone group functionality. And then on the right side of the slide, you will see how the reactivity of these cyclopentanone groups is under UV light. Under the UV light, they become reactive and they dimerize via cycloaddition reaction or cyclodimerization reaction. And thus, all the chains are linked together and a cross-linked polymer is obtained. So using this 4-CPA, together with several co-monomers, we have successfully synthesized a range of latexes, which were stable, and they readily formed films on substrates and freestanding, and they were homogeneous, and thus we could proceed with the UV curing. So with the UV curing, we enable the cyclodimerization, and the cross-linked films are obtained. So the final films, they showed good hardness. They were solvent resistant, which is also an indication of good cross-linking. They showed good blocking properties, and in some preliminary tests, they showed quite good oil and water barrier properties on paper substrates. So paper, of course, absorbs really fast water and oil, but if you apply a very thin layer of this latex and cross-link it under UV light, this absorption is quite reduced to a minimum. Then briefly I will explain the synthesis and chemistry of the second monomer, MEV. It is obtained via a two-step reaction from vanillin, and again it has the two distinctive functionalities, the methacrylate group and the aldehyde group. And again, we selectively polymerize the monomer via the methacrylate group, and we yield polymers having this pendant aldehyde functionality. And also this aldehyde functionality is reactive, namely with for example, a multifunctional amine crosslinker. So by the addition of this crosslinker, we can obtain cross-linked polymers via imine formation with dependent aldehyde group. And these imines, they have a special property that they are dynamic under heat. So in a conventional cross-linked polymer or thermoset, after the cross-linking, the cross-links are permanent and we cannot recycle or reshape or heal the polymer. It is then usually discarded. But in this case, with the dynamic crosslinks, we enable a secondary processing route for example, recycling or reshaping. So also with this MEV, we have synthesized polymers with a comonomer via two different procedures, via a solution polymerization process and emulsion polymerization process. And the resulting polymers were cross-linked with the multifunctional amine crosslinker. And the resulting films were shown that they were possible to be mechanically recycled. So then in conclusion, we have successfully investigated and achieved the synthesis of functional latexes via the Raft Precap process from the proposed bio-based monomers. We have investigated the film formation, and the cross-linking was also successful. And I foresee a potential for these polymers in recyclable or self-healing applications or as in coating applications. So with that, I would like to end my presentation and thank you for your attention. And I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much for your clear presentation. And that brings us to the defense part of the ceremony today. Before we go there, I would first like to welcome the audience to the session, and I would also like to introduce the supervisory team, Dr. Bernards and Professor Piech. They will not be asking questions today according to Maastricht defense custom. So moving to the opposition. The opposition will be opened by Professor Oru. Professor Oru has a chair in organic chemistry at Maastricht University, and he was also chair of the assessment committee. And today he's even acting as the secretary to the degree committee. Professor Oru.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rector, for giving me the word and giving me the opportunity to first congratulate you with a beautiful thesis with a lot of interesting work and a lot of nice publications that came out of it. So that's really an achievement that you can be proud of. Of course, if you are going to read through such a piece of work, always some questions remain, and it probably is also not a surprise that as an organic chemist I focus on more chemical aspects of the thesis. So that's why I would like to start my questions with directing you to scheme 2.1 of chapter 2. So in that scheme, you explain actually the synthetic sequence starting from furfuryl alcohol to towards, let's say, the polymeric materials that you are aiming for. And the first reaction there is a Biancatelli rearrangement, going from furfuryl alcohol to 4-HCP. So by doing that, you in fact go from a non-chiral or achiral molecule to a chiral molecule. So I assume that you used racemates in your further work?
Correct.
Okay. So what would that be for, what would that have for implication if you then in the second step do the polymerization?
Yeah, so highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. This is correct indeed, those 4-HCP molecules are racemic. And this, I expect, has as a consequence, well, in principle, you would expect from a polymerization that it would definitely disturb crystallization. But I don't think that typically those acrylate monomers don't form semi-crystalline polymers. But it might have an effect on the mobility of the chain, or somehow some kind of a packing or stacking. But I don't suspect a severe impact, at least on the thermal properties.
But it would mean in practice that, let's say, the polymeric materials that you have are, let's say, sort of diastereomeric mixtures of diastereomers.
Yes, indeed.
And so if you consider that going then in the last step of your, let's say, sequence, you're starting in fact with a mixture of diastereomers in the polymer that you made, and then you do the 2+2 cycloaddition, and that can go head to head or head to tail. So that makes even more complex mixtures.
Yes, and despite head to head and head to tail dimers, it could also, I think, even be kind of boat or chair structures, depending on how those cyclopentanone groups orient themselves.
So that means that the properties where you are looking at in the final material is just, let's say, an average of a lot of different molecules.
Yeah, indeed. So we don't aim to make, let's say, high-performance semi-crystalline polymers in that regard, or highly aligned polymer structures. Indeed, the moment you cross-link, it will be a complete chaotic mixture of all kinds of bonds and connections. But that is typically, I would say, expected from most cross-linked polymers.
Would it be interesting, do you think, to, let's say, start up front with a optically pure product? So after, because it's known from the literature that you can do the Biancatelli rearrangement stereoselectively, so you could use that chiral catalyst to do the Biancatelli rearrangement, and then you start up front with a optically pure material, and then you omit already at least half of the let's say molecules from your mixture, and you have a much, let's say, purer or cleaner material to work with. Would that be interesting, you think, or not?
Yeah, no, I gave that some thought indeed at some point. Let's say for the application that we aimed for, it is probably not interesting, but maybe if some kind of an optical effect in the polymer is to be desired, or in some way, crystallization needs to be achieved, then it could be interesting. But I don't know if that's possible.
So it will be perhaps interesting for follow-up research.
Yes.
Another question also on this topic, just let's say sort of brainstorming on variants and variations. So except for the stereochemistry issues, you could also imagine that you could do a ASA Biancatelli rearrangement. So then you would introduce nitrogen in the chains. That would also probably have quite some interesting, let's say, impact on the properties. Do you consider that as an interesting variation, or do you think it's a worthless idea?
No, it's an interesting suggestion, but I didn't give it much thought yet. But maybe with respect to potentially hydrogen bonding could be an interesting addition, and definitely I expect different properties from the polymer. Yeah,
because you introduce nitrogen, but on the other hand, that might also have other problems, so you never know. So let's move to another question. So actually, during your presentation, I thought an extra question came up, which I didn't prepare before. And you showed in one of your slides that you had, let's say, the polymeric film, which is the cyclohexyl film material, and then in the step afterwards, you showed this macrocyclic system. So how does that work? Do you somehow remove all the internal bonds in that whole process?
Macrocyclic bond, I don't think. Yeah, maybe I can take the slide.
That's a slide 4. So maybe I just misinterpreted the whole scheme. So you go from this latex balls to water evaporating and particle packing, which is cyclohexyl rings, huh? And then you say diffusion, and then you all of a sudden have a macrocyclic ring. How does that work?
Yeah, okay. I understand the confusion. What I show here is actually the latex particles itself. So it's not a molecular structure, and due to the evaporation of the water, this capillary force between those spherical particles, which they are initially, you get this hexagonal structure, this packing of the hexagonal structure of the particles in the film. And at this point, they are still separate particles, but they are completely packed in this hexagonal structure. But if you don't have at this point the diffusion, you obtain a really mechanically weak film. So this is not a...
so this is not like a breaking of bonds, in fact, what you imply here.
No, okay. This is not a molecule. No.
Okay. So, sorry about the confusion, but I was just wondering about this.
Yeah, no worries.
Then I have a final question on, let's say, chapter 6, the final chapter in your nice thesis, which is about this MEV monomer. Mm-hmm. And there on page 183, you show, in fact, the general principle of what you are doing in this chapter. So you go from this monomeric, or this, let's say, vanillinic polymeric material. You then make this dendritic system, which has the 3 imine functions in there. So you react it with the tetraamine to make the triimine. So I was just wondering, I'm an organic chemist, so how hydrolytically stable are these imines in this system?
Yeah, that's a good question. They are not known for good hydrolytic stability. So in fact, those imine bonds, they have quite a unique interaction with water. So I've explained already that they are dynamic. They can exchange with each other, but they also like to react with water. Under certain conditions, obtaining the reversible reaction, in fact. And this reaction is can go back and forth. So it can go to the imine, it can go to the amine plus aldehyde. And this is also a way to introduce another way of an extra dynamic component inside these crosslinks you can achieve with the amount of moisture in the polymers.
Yeah, because that was also the thought I had. You could, if they are not that stable, they could be acting as a sort of electrophilic trap, and then so you could throw in other nucleophiles and see if you can post-functionalize the, let's say, vitrimeric material after you did the first initial triimine formation. Would that be a feasible route or idea to then, let's say, functionalize, in fact, these imines further? And would that have some influence on your properties?
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't given that too much thought yet. I was only focused on really the reversible reaction or exchange reaction. Out of the top of my head, I'm not really familiar with any additional functionalization reactions of the imine. Mm-hmm. If it shows some reactivity, then it is a reactive group. Indeed, the polymer, the crosslink polymer, can be further functionalized with that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you could even imagine that you make crosslinks via this imine function chemically. Well, just ideas and thoughts, but just interesting to see what could be possible further with the systems that you make. I look at the clock and I think more or less my time is over. So I give the floor back to the rector. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Oru. Then the opposition will be continued by Dr. Noordover. Dr. Noordover is a synthesis manager at Allnex in Bergen op Zoom. So welcome here to represent industry in this committee. Dr. Noordover is also a member of the assessment committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And of course, first of all, I would like to congratulate the candidate with this very nice booklet. Impressive amount of work and breadth of topics as well, so quite a lot of ground covered, I would say. And the good thing about that is, of course, that we can ask questions about many different things. So let's get started with that. And to start, I would like to also activate your seconds a little bit, because I would like one of them to read out one of your statements, in fact. And I did not choose the longest one, but I would be grateful if someone could read out statement number 8 for the audience.
Considering the polymerization synthesis mixture as a final product is an efficient way of working, but it leaves less room for concession during synthesis. Thank
you very much. Good. Yes, now I was introduced as someone from industry, and when we make something, we tend to have a goal in mind, which is a product which is within our specifications. So I like this idea. I'm a polymer chemist myself, so having sort of an open-ended synthesis is, of course, something that you would like to do. But could you please explain how you see this? How would you do this in practice? You're starting a synthesis, and then you think, what shall I chuck in now? Or how do you how should I interpret this statement?
So, esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. Indeed, I think, well, when I started as a polymer chemist, I was used maybe to work in bulk or solution and work from a really academic perspective, where you can always, after the polymerization, do some kind of a purification reaction or some kind of a workup where you purify or improve the quality of the stuff that you've made. But in case of a latex, I would say this is, there are some post-polymerization processes that are possible, but in fact the latex that is made is being used in a later stage by the consumer, either directly or it's a bit formulated to go in a product, and thus any toxic components that you add will be in the final product. Any residual monomers will be in the product, so you want, for example, really high conversion typically when you make a latex. So in that regard, you really need to match those requirements that match also the expectations later on when the latex is used. So in that regard.
Okay, that's very nice, because you've also sort of already built a bridge to perhaps one of my next questions, but I will come to that later. I first wanted to talk a little bit about figure 1.2 on page 20 of chapter 1, where you make a rather bold statement, I would say. You repeated it also in your presentation, where you say that, what was I saying, chapter 1? You have a nice scheme where you show the differences between free radical polymerization and raft polymerization. Now, my colleague on my right-hand side knows a lot more about raft polymerization than I do, and you can do a lot of control. But here you make the statement, for free radical polymerization, no control over the molecular weight. That is quite something, eh?
Yeah, I understand it's a bit harshly stated. I mean, there are ways to control it. Well,
can you give an example? Can you give an example?
I would say the amount of initiator that is added.
For example?
For example, also chain transfer agents. Typically, they reduce the molecular weight. Maybe temperature has an influence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So in that way, they can be influenced, but not as strictly controlled as is possible in the underraft conditions.
Okay, so thank you for putting some nuance on your statement here, and I fully agree. And I can also tell you that all of the above, all the factors that you mentioned, are used, of course, in daily practice to actually control molecular weights of commercially produced polymers and bring them into specifications, which are actually narrower than you would think. I think. Good. Going back to the toxic molecules that might swim around in your final product, I see in your processes that you use all kinds of very nice effective chemicals like acrylates chloride. I see toluene, I see DMF, I saw a few others. Of course, you're aiming for a nice bio-based safe system. I forget to mention the triamine that you use in your vitromers. Also not the nicest SDS, I looked it up. Do you foresee that your synthetic routes can be improved? And you don't have to do all 4 of them. Maybe we can start with the acrylates chloride to make your bio-based molecule.
Yeah.
Would you foresee other routes there?
Yeah, so indeed the acrylates chloride is very dangerous chemical, of course, and but yeah, if you go in the academic literature, you see that this is also an extremely reliable way of synthesizing the monomer, and a really effective way. And I've given this also some thought. There are definitely alternatives. For example, acrylic anhydride can be used, which is already considerably more safer and also very reactive. I think it will be successful. And there are also direct esterification possibilities with acrylic acid. They can be catalyzed via different ways, and this is also an alternative route. But when you want to make this structure, the use of acrylic acid is almost unavoidable, I think.
Thank you. Good to hear that there are indeed some better routes on the horizon. I want to talk a little bit more about the polymers that you've made, if the director allows me, of course. I want to take you to chapter 2. On page 43, 44, you talk about the polymerizations that you do, and I think this is purely with the 4-CPA, so you're making this nice bio-based polymer.
Yeah.
And you see that you get some gelation. You get some cross-links formed. You look at NMR to establish whether the internal double bond of your 4-CPA has reacted or not. And you claim that it remains nearly intact. That's of course also a nice statement. Error margin in an NMR measurement, more or less?
Yeah, maybe 1 to a few %.
Yeah, okay, if you're lucky.
With polymers, it might be more. But,
So it can go up to, I think, easily 5%, depending on what polymer you're looking at. So, okay. Let's say that you have, and I'll stick to your upper limits of 3%, and you polymerize to a degree of polymerization of 100. So what does that mean for the material that you're making, or the polymer chain that you're making? And how many cross connections can it make?
Yeah, if you talk about pure 4-CPA homopolymer, then that means it could make 100 crosslinks on one chain.
Yeah, so and let's say that you measure 1 to 3% of double bonds that have reacted, so that gives your chain already a cross-linking functionality of about 3 and potentially even higher. So of course, the cross-linking that you observe is not surprising, and there's also links a bit to chapter 4, where of course you also see gelation occurring, and you have to reduce the amount of 4-CPA to about 25% to keep that under control, but still you reach gel contents up to 94%. And then I'm a little bit curious, going back to your statement in chapter 1, where free radical polymerization has no control over molecular weight. What is the exact advantage of RAFT here? Would it be even worse with free radical polymerization?
Yes, that's definitely what I think. This is also attempted. So with let's say in a typical emulsion polymerization, sometimes it is not, I would say, unusual to expect a certain degree of cross-linking or some broadening or gelation. And this is not even very negative impact on the film forming. Sometimes it can even increase some properties. So in that case, I wasn't so worried about it with this RAFT procedure. But definitely when this monomer was used in a free radical polymerization, the molecular weights that are typically obtained are much higher. And thus, again, we come to the question of the functionality per chain will also be higher, and definitely the cross-linking degree will be higher. And then, this is not really thoroughly investigated, but I expect problems with the film formation then, because you really need also some mixing of those particles, some diffusion, even if it's from some dangling chain ends during the film formation. So this cross-linking is a risk, and 93% seems high, but maybe there's still a lot of chains hanging around and capable of doing still the film forming and cross-linking between the particles. That's how I see it, and that's also reflected by the properties of the film. So,
okay, thank you. I don't know, Mr. Rector. Is it?
I think your time is up.
I think my time is up, then I thank you very much.
Maybe we have some time left later.
It's fine, it's fine.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Noordhoven. And the opposition will be continued by Professor Honing. Professor Honing holds a chair in Analytics and System Imaging at Maastricht University. And was also a member of the assessment committee. Professor Honing.
Thank you, Mr. Rector. Dear candidate, congratulations with this maybe Van Gogh-inspired thesis. At least a lot of particles, so that's in line with what we have been reading. Very, I would say, detailed work, very solid and comprehensive. But nevertheless, there's always questions. I would like to ask one of your assistants to read proposition number 3.
Proposition number 3, always keep an eye open for unexpected results during experimentation.
So my question to you is, I should close my eyes when the results are like I wanted them to be.
Yeah, of course. Sorry. Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. I think it's a fair thing to ask after this statement. I think that is what I want to bring with this statement, is that as a scientist you do an experiment, but you don't do anything randomly. You have a certain theory about what will happen, and so what you see can or cannot align with this theory, and sometimes certain observations, I think, can get lost in this process that could be very important and open a different route that you have never anticipated before.
Yeah, so then unexpected is not unexpected in the sense that you did not like it, but really unexpected, like it's not within your hypothesis, and then you agree as a scientist that you can never know everything at the same time. Yes. Because I was always taught that at the moment I got the results I wanted, my professor said that then you have to start to worry Otherwise, it becomes self-fulfilling prophecy type of research, and that's maybe a good sign. But then I'm still quite my eyes fall out of my head because I saw something unexpected in your presentation. There's no reference to chapter 2. So where is this drug release system? You did not discuss anything about it, and I think it is an important chapter. So is it not that important, maybe?
Yeah, I think it's. I agree. I think it's a nice chapter. I would say it's yeah, not that in line with the rest of the work. So maybe that's why I chose not to show it in the presentation. But there is definitely.
But it's also not in the impact. So there is also no impact of this research, or a little bit impact.
Yeah. So my I would say when I theorized about this project, my aim was to really learn about a new field in polymer chemistry, and also what kind of new applications we can use it for. So in this case, as drug delivery vehicles. But it also, I would say, is another way of bringing these type of polymers into water. There's one way where you do it in situ and make a latex, and this is really a different route, where you make first the polymer and then bring it into water, usually under very dilute conditions, much diluted conditions, and then a totally different product can be obtained. So that's why it differs quite some from this whole coatings story, of course. But I still think it's really relevant.
Maybe we can continue, because I think it's very interesting, and also again unexpected results. So if you go to page 90 and figure 310, especially A, they're at a concentration of 0.2 milligram per milliliter of the doxyrubicin. You see less or higher viability of the cells compared to the cross-linked, while at the lower and the higher concentration, that's exactly reversed. So I would say this is a mismeasurement, and you write a whole article or a whole page on to explain that difference, but it's not in line. And when later on you look to picture B, everything is in line. So was this an unexpected result, or is there really a story to it? And why is the pH not playing a role at 0.02 and 2?
So in figure A, we investigate the cytotoxicity of the polymers or the polymer particles themselves.
So you compare the unmodified with the cross-linked. Yeah?
Right.
And then you see actually at low concentration that let's say the toxicity of the unmodified is higher than from the cross-linked, as is for 2 milligram, because then there is no cell left anyway. But then suddenly at 0.2 is completely reversed by a factor of 3. So that's quite unexpected.
Yes, I agree. I think it's in the measurement, a bit of an error in the measurement when you work with these cells. In general, I would say then the conclusion that you make is either quite high viability or really low, and that is a bit how you need to look then at the in the graph.
No, then I completely agree. But the particles, let's say the green bars, they show much more viability compared to the cross-linked and the non-cross-linked. And I would judge that the unmodified maybe has some monomers in it, or more monomers, because acrylic acid you don't want in your body, I assume. So maybe we can go back also to page 89, the page before, figure 3.9, and then it starts really to be amazing, because you see two effects. First of all, the effect of pH. So at lower pH, you see much more release than at pH 7, a factor of 2, which is significant, I would say. But then when you look to the structure of doxyrubicin, then I would say you could have expected that. So
Yes.
There is a primary amine on the glycoside group.
Mhm.
The other part, well, that's very hydrophobic, like you always explained in your... but would this not be logic then?
Yes, I think so. Well, there is a reason that, let's say, I confirm it with the measurements. The reason why the two pHs are checked is 7.4 is physiological pH, while it is theorized that in cancerous tumors the pH can be lower, and thus an enhanced release of this anti-cancer agent is to be expected in tumors. But nonetheless, I have to say the release is also quite rapid.
Yeah, and sometimes it's even an advantage because you block also inflammatory reactions of your body at lower pH. But then when we have a closer look, then you say, okay, let's say the unmodified has at 72 hours 50%, while the cross-linked has whatever 35% release. But the kinetics, the first kinetics of the cross-linked are by far higher, but really far higher than the unmodified. And then it has a plateau, while the unmodified has no plateau. So although you think from this picture the unmodified be the best, you not argue that the cross-linked would be the best because it's really a burst of the drug into the body.
Yeah, but I don't know if a burst is really beneficial always. Maybe a slow release is sometimes desired.
Yeah.
The reason why it is that this drug loading was performed after the cross-linking. Typically because those type of drugs are UV sensitive. So
I agree with you, and
so
that maybe ends with another question I had. And in the introduction, you said, well, actually, the reason why I do this research is because this acrylate type of self-assembling particles of this block of copolymers was never done, but there has been already in clinical trials self-assembling particles for this drug.
Yeah.
I think to Crystal Therapeutics, which is clear near to the hospital. But what was initially your idea in terms of product plus of this type of particles? So what, or were you more interested in the polymer system than in the product plus in terms of patients?
Right. So indeed, the interest in the behavior of these block copolymers is for me of interest when looking at the other chapters, how it behaves in water, for example. And indeed, it forms readily particles, which is a good indication. But the main idea is that we can use this UV cross-linker as an additional step when preparing those particles to get a different effect during the release of the drug.
Okay, so to end up, you would agree that this research will have or can have an impact because you can control the cross-linking and you can control the way the drug is released.
Yes, that is the indeed.
At least the basis of this data.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Then we agree, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Honing. And the opposition will be continued by Dr. Heuts. Dr. Heuts is an associate professor in supramolecular polymer chemistry at Eindhoven University of Technology. Dr. Heuts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear candidate, let me also congratulate you with a very nice thesis. It was a pleasure to read it, especially because I seldom see theses in which each chapter really contains one of my research interests. So yeah, I do have one or two questions for you. When we go to chapter 2, you want to study the reactivity of that second double bond in your monomer. And you make a really nice model compound. And then, you show that the model compound doesn't homopolymerize. And then you want to see how it copolymerizes. You even do moldy experiments and so on. But my first question here is like, when you want to study its copolymerization, why didn't you just copolymerize it with butyl acrylate or something?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for your question. You mean this model molecule, the copolymerization of the molecule? Yes, that is indeed also an option. I wanted to keep the, let's say, the idea behind it was to keep the reaction conditions as close as possible as if you are making a homopolymerization of this 4-CPA. So therefore, it was investigated in the copolymerization with 4-CPA. I would expect anyway that the main reactivity will come from the acrylate groups. But there are definitely side reactions originating from the cyclopentanone group. But let's say the reactivity of the acrylate group from the 4-CPA will be, I expect it to be in a similar order of magnitude from butyl acrylate or another acrylate.
Oh, I totally agree. And that's also why I think it would have been probably a cleaner experiment if you had not done that. Because, for example, when you look at your conversion versus time curves on page 48 or even your moldy curve, how do you know that what you measure here in conversion of your 4-CPA is through the acrylate group and not through the other group? Yes. I mean, the other group could also be the first one to make it incorporate. Somewhere I read that could be at higher conversion, could be 3-4%. When I sort of look at the difference in the end here, that's 3-4%.
Yeah, indeed, this is a really good question to consider when you do the homo or copolymerization with the 4-CPA. Indeed, when you look at these conversion graphs, the conversion is measured from GC FID experiments, measurements, and you only look at the disappearance of the monomer. So indeed, you just mention it as conversion, but you don't prove what happens with it. It could have been maybe even evaporated or degraded or turned into a polymer. So then we have to look at other evidence, I would say. For example, the yield of the polymer. So if you have an extremely low yield that doesn't match with your conversions, then you can say something else might have happened. And also, a rather thorough characterization through NMR spectroscopy was done to look at the structure of the polymer, and there we find mostly, we don't find any acrylate bonds back, but we do find those double bonds from the cyclopentanone.
Oh, no, I totally agree, but you want to get a lot of detail on your structure, and also you actually use a lot of kinetics trying to explain your results. I just think you would have probably gotten a little bit more out of it if you had just done the polymerization with the pure acrylate. But that's my opinion.
No, I agree, yes.
Okay, good. Now, also going a little bit back to the question of Dr. Noordover about controlling things in normal radical polymerization. And I would like to go to page 42, table 2.1. Yeah, and you vary things there, and then you ascribe lower rates that you observe to termination and chain transfer. Now my question is, what actually determines termination in your radical polymerization, or in your RAF polymerization for that matter?
Yeah, termination can happen, for example, by a combination of radicals. Then the concentration of the radicals is important. So with a high concentration, I would say it's more likely that two radicals meet and combine.
That's the one. Keep that one. What determines your radical concentration?
The amount of initiator and temperature.
Okay. Now, when you look at your table, you keep the concentration of your monomer constant, or even you go from 20 to 60%, but then you start varying your raft agent concentration and your initiator concentration. So I guess when you change those ratios, what you've changed was the concentration raft agent and initiator. I guess, because that's what you do.
With respect to the monomer.
Yeah. So if you keep the monomer concentration constant, and you lower the initiator concentration, then the lower rate is not unexpected at all.
Yes, indeed. So, the rate in this case, the overall rate of polymerization is affected by the concentration of the initiator.
Exactly. So that was not too much of an exciting result.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's have a look at your. I mean, a lot of your the rest of your thesis is on copolymerization in emulsion polymerization, and that's I just really love that as a topic. And what you've done is when you look at your copolymerizations, you have nicely determined all the reactivity ratios, and luckily what you find is that indeed when you copolymerize two acrylates, that the reactivity ratios are very close to 1, which is what you expect. But when you then look at a emulsion copolymerization, especially when your reactivity ratios are very close to 1, what is more important than your reactivity ratios that determine your potential composition drift?
Right, that's a very good remark. And the acrylates, they indeed, in a homogeneous solution, they react relatively at the same way, even if you put a very different substituent on it. But in an emulsion polymerization, we don't have a homogeneous mixture. It is the monomers. They are present mostly, at least in the beginning, in the particles. They migrate into the water. They migrate to the micelles. And this transfer, mainly this transfer from the monomer droplets to the growing micelles, is one of the main factors that affects.
This is something that I do not agree with, because there's hardly any transport limitations in a normal emulsion polymerization. But suppose you got a polymerization of methyl acrylate and butyl acrylate. And they have got reactivity ratios of about 1 to 1. So they're just really nice. Now, if you do a batch emulsion polymerization, what you will see is that although you would expect a completely random copolymer and solution polymerization, what you will see is that in the beginning, you will make a polymer that contains much more butyl acrylate, and then towards the end, you're going to start incorporating more methyl acrylate. It's got nothing to do with the transport, but what does it have to do with?
Yeah, that's that's an interesting observation, I would say. Somehow I expect that the hydrophilicity or the polarity of the monomer plays a role.
It's the water solubility. So there's hardly any butyl acrylate in the water phase, but there's lots and lots of methyl acrylate in the water phase. Now, when you look at polymerizations with this octyl acrylate, and then you look at your 4-CPA, which one do you think is more water soluble?
Yeah, the 4-CPA.
And what do you think that your macro raft agent will add to when it is in the water phase?
Right, in the beginning of the polymerization, it will mainly form some 4-CPA polymer.
Yeah, so the thing is that you make the first oligomers you make are going to really be only with the 4-CPA, And that may actually also explain the results that you couldn't do them with the really high amounts of the 4 CPA.
Right, I agree.
Jules Stouten, the time appointed for defending your thesis has passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and your defense. I request that you and your company await the results of our deliberations and our return in this room.
Please, all right.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side, no place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. On the line, I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side, no place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Hit the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. And even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you've won the battle once you've grown. South side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side, no place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer. East side to the west side, no place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. What's on the line? I know you know that I can't read your mind. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. Cause I'll go the extra mile.
I reopen the session. Jules Stouten, the degree committee here present has assessed the quality of your thesis and your defense. In view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualifications, the degree committee has decided to grant you the degree of doctor. Dr. Bernards is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance with Dutch university custom. I invite your supervisor to now take the floor.
Please all rise. Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Jules Stouten, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary and the other members of the committee and affixed with the official seal of the university. Dear Jules, our collaboration started in 2016 when you came to my group for your HBO bachelor thesis. In that time, Yuri Noordijk was your daily supervisor in the lab, and it's really a pleasure to see how Yuri continued to be your friend, inspirator, and motivator during your career. You are one of the happy few who still worked in our spacious labs in Building 93, where we sub-rented from DSM. Where is the time? As a bachelor student, you were standing out, and you took the clever decision to continue for a master, the Master Bio-Based Materials at Maastricht University. I was very happy when you joined my group again for your master thesis, and even more happy when you decided to stay for a PhD. Each time, you worked on different projects and you learned different techniques, which gives you a broad basis as a polymer chemist. It was nice to see you growing as a researcher and as a person. You always perform your work well thought and thoroughly. You always have creative ideas and of high level, and you are very productive and passionate. This resulted in 8 published papers, 2 ongoing ones, and a book chapter. As a supervisor, I'm of course very proud of you. During PhD, you set up several exciting collaborations, the modeling work together with Danny van Poeken, the drug delivery work together with Professor Moroni, and the 3D printing Vitrumer project, which was not in your thesis, but which was published together with Standen. And probably I still forgot a few projects. You were also always very open to discuss the projects of your colleagues, and you inspired many people in the lab. Next to that, you supervised several students who, sorry for the Dutch, met een gat in de boter zijn gevallen, that they found you as daily supervisor. In all collaborations, you were very much respected both as a person and as a scientist. The same feedback came from the KNCV section macromolecules, where you acted as a student member for 4 years, and under your management, the website was kept up to date and was upgraded considerably. I'm very happy that you could start immediately after your PhD at Staal in Waalwijk, and I'm 100% sure that they have done a good business by hiring you. Thanks a lot for the important contribution you made to the Sustainable Polymer Synthesis Group. I wish you, together with Monica, all the best, both professional and in private life.
Thank you.
Dear Dr. Stouten, also on behalf of Maastricht University, I congratulate you with the degree you obtained. And I would like to extend my congratulations to the family and relatives, to the friends and colleagues here present. I would also like to express the thanks of Maastricht University to the committee members that have traveled here from Eindhoven and Bergen op Zoom to contribute to this defense. And there was actually also a committee member who fell ill at last moment and would otherwise have joined us, but had to stay back in Wuppertal. But also thanks for the efforts put into that. Then hereby I close this session. What is left are some household remarks. We will now